So, Stephanie, you have spent 15 years working in marketing and the creative and tech industries, including 13 years in senior roles at Nike and Apple. In 2019, you transitioned from corporate leadership to entrepreneurship, founding the Creative Career Lab and launching Creative Career Level Up, a coaching and training program designed to help professionals in marketing, creative, and tech fields advance their careers. Alongside your coaching work, you're also an angel investor and you are an active property investor in the UK. And as I've said 1,000 times, I think you're super cool. So I had to get you on the show and just learn about more that you have done and learn about what you are doing, get your insights and advice because you are clearly very experienced, knowledgeable, and you seem to be just a really bubbly person. And from your LinkedIn post, you've just got so much to offer people. So super happy that you are on the show. Very excited to speak to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to share this. I think anytime you get to share knowledge with people is wonderful, and we're so lucky to be living in a time where there is so much knowledge available. So I absolutely love sharing what I've learned in my career with other people. So thank you for having me on the show.
No, pleasure is all mine. So, as I said, you've spent a decade in senior roles at the likes of Apple and Nike, two global giants with very different products, and I imagine different cultures as well. But feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. What initially drew you to each of those companies, and what were some of the most impactful campaigns or projects that you led, or help shape or just like help shape your time whilst you were there?
Yeah, well, there's actually probably more similarities between the two than there is differences if you're comparing them to every company in the world, in the sense that they're both big American companies, they're big global corporations. And I think from a marketing perspective, the biggest thing that connects them that is significant is that they're marketing led organizations. So there's probably marketeers listening to this right now thinking, oh my gosh, I know what she means, which is if you end up in an organization where they think that marketing is a sideline function or a support function is what some companies call it. They say this supports our sales team, or you support this, you support that. That's not the case at Nike and Apple. They know that brand marketing is very, very important. And so they know that you have to do the marketing well, you have to do the brand well, and they'll often make decisions about the brand that is potentially detrimental to the commercial side of the business if they believe that the long-term brand health is at stake. And I remember when I first joined Nike that there was a GM at Nike who uh, was leading the UK business, and we had a situation with Nike where one of our retail partners, and if you live in the UK, you might be able to work out who it is. I'm not going to name them, but one of our retail partners was heavily discounting our product, and you're not allowed to influence the price that retailers sell product at. That's illegal, so you're not allowed to do that. But you can influence how it shows up in store. You want it to look premium. You want it to be a premium product, and I remember there was big conversations at the time about how we were going to deal with this particular retailer and what we needed to do, and if we needed to stop selling to them. I think they were a huge part of the Nike business at the time. If we needed to stop selling to them, then we would stop selling to one of our biggest partners temporarily to make the point that we all need to get around a table, and we can't influence the price, but can we make the product show up in a more premium way in your stores? For example, better fixtures, better presentation, better training for your staff. And at first they weren't keen to sit down and discuss those kind of things. And so there was this discussion around, well, we will stop supplying you with product because you are going to damage the brand in the UK and we won't have a brand left at the end of it. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's just such an incredible lesson about how important the brand side of things is. And Apple was the same. I saw conversations and decisions made in Apple that were detrimental to the commercial side. It meant they may have lost money in the short term, but it meant that the health of the business was there in the long term. And that's what you get with marketing led organizations. And to be honest, there's not many marketing led organizations. There's not that many companies in the grand scheme of the world that lead with their brand first, because they know that if you keep the brand healthy, then the sales will come. And that's what both of those brands at the heart of them believe. So that's a big similarity between the two. In terms of projects I worked on there, I mean, when you work for companies of that size, and this is something that I've personally liked, and it may not be for everyone, but I really loved being part of a team. they're big global companies, so you're always going to be part of a team when you work in a big company like that. And that never bothered me. I know for some people, they want to be able to say, I did this and I did this and I did this. But when you work in a big company, you're always part of a team. And it's always, we did this, we did this. And that never bothered me. I loved walking out at Oxford Circus and seeing, a Nike campaign or a new iPhone campaign and knowing that I was part of the team that delivered that. And because we were part of a big company and a big team, you therefore got to see big campaigns launch, stuff that took over the whole of London or took over the whole of, or even globally, when the iPhone 6 launched, which was my first campaign at Apple, it was amazing just seeing how huge an iPhone launch was and the machine that went behind an iPhone launch. Not many people get to see behind the scenes of that. And it was just incredible what goes on behind the scenes to deliver such a premium campaign and such a huge launch moment. And it was amazing to get to be part of both those companies.
I think the point that you made about marketing-led companies is really interesting, and it does, blow me away when you, say that there aren't that many companies that do that, and I've heard on multiple times when there's ever, like, a recession or difficulty in the, market, the first thing to get cut is the marketing budget, and it's just like, when you're looking at companies like Apple and Nike that are marketing led, do you think why? Because it's so important to carry on pushing the name out there when the financial markets are distressed. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how you have two prominent businesses that are saying we're market led, and then other people are just like, now we'll cut it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and some
but
and
yeah,
some companies cut it completely, like get rid of their marketing teams, and that's why I say, look, many companies, they want to say that they care about marketing, they want to pretend they care about marketing, but when it comes to the crunch, they don't, and you can really feel that when you work in an organization like that, and it's so different when you work in an organization where marketing is really respected.
Mm. So, we're gonna come on to, your advice, in helping people land their dream marketing roles. But I imagine, Apple and Nike are a lot of people's marketing roles, and you've obviously secured, uh, senior positions there. So, besides kind of like telling us your top tips for landing these roles, how exactly did you land those roles?
Yeah, so Nike's probably the more interesting of those two stories. I arrived in the UK when I was 23. I had been living in New Zealand before that. I had just graduated university. I worked in New Zealand for about a year before I came to the UK, and then when I got to the UK, I just got the best job I could get. When you come from a country like New Zealand, you don't expect to walk into uh, opportunities that are these amazing companies. Although I absolutely had a list of companies that I really wanted to work for. I say this to people on my program all the time. Actually, there's a wonderful girl, Julia, who's just moved from Canada. Uh, and she's in my program and she's looking for a job in the UK at the moment. And she's in her mid 20s. And it's so wonderful chatting to her because I said, even she's come from Toronto, but I said, even coming from Toronto compared to London, like London's just everything is in London. Like any brand you can think of in your head probably has a presence in London and you can work there. Like everything's on the table, and that was really exciting for me coming from New Zealand. And but I was also realistic that arriving at 23, having not grown up in the UK, I wasn't going to walk straight into one of these companies. I thought you had to know people to get into these companies, and I didn't know anyone. I only knew other Kiwis, and so I didn't expect to get a job at any of these companies immediately. And so I got a job working for an in-house agency within a FTSE 100 company, and it was great. It was a good starter job. I worked with nice people. We did nice work, but it definitely wasn't the job that I moved from New Zealand for. And then about a year after I started there, I got let go from that job. They were having some financial troubles and they needed to let some people go. And I was the one that was chosen. And it was really tough. Like this was long before there was mass layoffs and it was really common to lose your job. It really wasn't back then. It was probably the start of that sort of stuff becoming more common, but it certainly wasn't common at the time. And I had no friends that had lost their jobs. I didn't know anyone. And it was really tough. Like it was yeah, I'd come to the UK. I was a year into my career and I'd essentially been fired. I hadn't done anything wrong per se, but I'd been chosen to be let go from a group of people where they could have chosen someone else and they chose me. And it was really, really hard. It was really bad on my confidence. And I I got into quite a dark place for quite a few months, and I really struggled. And I was very lucky at the time. It was 2006, so it was pre the global financial crisis, which obviously completely rocked economies. I was very lucky. It was, before that, so there were jobs around, but just what it does to your confidence when you lose a job, especially early on in your career. I hadn't had any sort of failure like that before, so it was really tough. And I got a job at another company up in London. So the company originally I'd been working for was sort of in South London, maybe zone 5 or 6. So I was, on the outskirts of London. And I got this job at an agency in central London, and it was horrible. I'd gone from being let go from this other company to go into this new company up in central London. I was like, this is it. I'm working in central London now. This is exciting. And it was horrible. It was a big uh, advertising agency, and culturally, it just wasn't the right fit for me. It was really, really tough. And I hated it. I really hated it. I was miserable. I lived in West Hampstead. I had to travel to Farrington every day, and I would be like crying on the tube on the way to work. It's the worst I've ever felt about going to a job. And about 4 weeks, no, probably about maybe 8 weeks in, one of my good friends came over from Australia, and she was traveling around the world, and she was on her way to Europe, and she stayed with me for a few days. And she was like, wow, you're miserable. Like, I've never seen you like this before. Like, and it was like someone shining a light on me as to how bad it actually was. Like, I think I was sucking it up, but it was really bad. And she was like, I can't believe, you know, you're like this. Like, I haven't seen you like this. And that was what I needed. I decided to quit my job, and I went into the office, and there was a catalyst for me quitting that job, which was I'd been working on this piece of creative for Barclays Bank, and it had football in it. And the football was a Nike football because Nike was the sponsor of the Premier League, and so was Barclays. And it was sort of the final straw. It was like a Thursday afternoon. I was trying to get this piece of creative signed off. And if you didn't get the creative signed off on time, it would delay things, not just by like an hour, if it would delay it by days, because it was such a huge agency. And I was trying to get hold of my contact at Barclays was trying to get hold of someone at Nike to sign this ball off, and no one was around. And eventually she got hold of someone on Friday morning. At this point, we were already a day late getting this thing to print. And I was so stressed. It was horrible. And she came back to me and she said, oh, I just got hold of my contact at someone at Nike, and no one's in the office today because Michael Jordan is in town, and they all went to this event with him last night, and no one's coming in today. So it's going to be Monday before this gets signed off. And I went back to my desk, and I just felt sick, and I was so upset, and I didn't know what to do. I wasn't very well supported in that role either. So it's not like I had a boss who was like, hey, it's going to be okay. Like, I was 23. I was so stressed about the fact we were 2 days late to get essentially a piece of artwork that was meant to go in every single Barclays Bank branch around the whole country off to print. And I went into the bathroom and I started crying, and I went back to my desk after that and just wrote a resignation letter. And I resigned that day. And I had to give I think, a week's notice. And then I went to Prague with my friend who was traveling around the world. I took a few days off. And then when I came back to the UK, there had been a girl who I sat next to at that job who put me in touch with a recruitment agent. And I went and saw that recruitment agent that morning. It was a Tuesday. And he rang me that afternoon, and he was like, hey, I've got this role working for a big global sports brand. It's just a contract role. It'll just be 3 months, but you've got some sport experience from New Zealand, because the 1 year that I did spend working in New Zealand was for a sports company. And he said, you'd be a great fit, and they need someone immediately. Like, they want someone to start yesterday. So why don't you come in? And so I went in, and essentially I went in and met with the agency who was sending someone to work at Nike for 3 months. And I knew straight away, but they didn't even tell me. They wouldn't tell me on the call who the big global sports brand was, but I was like, it's Nike. I know it's Nike. And I knew it was Nike because I felt like the situation with the ball and the Barclays Bank creative was like the universe coming back around. And Nike was one of those brands on my list. It was definitely the kind of brand I wanted to work for when I came to the UK. And I just knew in my heart, I was like, when I get to this office, they're going to tell me that it's Nike. And it was. And because they needed someone straight away, it was just a contract role. I literally started 2 days later, and I was on contract for 3 months, and I stayed for 8 years. and eventually it became a permanent role, and that's how I got my foot in the door at Nike. And I always say to people, like, I don't think I would have got a job there if I'd had to apply against the whole market. Like, if they'd advertised that job and gone out looking for people, I don't think I would have got that job. And I tell that story because I think that's quite a common way that things happen in the job market. An opportunity comes up, people need people quickly, someone in your network remembers that you're looking for something. Like, it's a people business, job hunting. When you're looking for jobs, it's a people business. You want to have a good network. You want to have people that advocate for you. You also want to have a little bit of luck go your way, like I did. And it does happen like that sometimes. So, that story of getting into Nike, I always feel a bit cheeky telling it because I'm like, I did not have to compete like many people would have to compete to get into a company like that. But I took my chances once I was in there. I built very, very quickly. I built solid relationships with everyone on my team. I felt like I added a lot of value. I worked really hard. And so by the time, my contract came up, I had those close relationships with people that they wanted me to stay.
I think that's such a great story. I have to say it. Um, it's a fabulous story because people so often get disappointed by things that they didn't get, and and unfortunate situations, and out of those situations and things they didn't get, like, you're just a prime example. So much great can come of them. It really is that cliche of when one door closes, another one opens.
Yeah.
It's just, trying to remain upbeat whilst maybe you're getting a couple of doors slammed in your face.
Yeah,
Um,
Stephanie, you're absolutely right, 100%. And I say this to people all the time. There's this Chinese proverb about a farmer and his horses and his son, and you should Google it. It'll come up straight away. I'm not going to tell the proverb on here because I'll probably butcher the story, but it's essentially about how we never know if something is good or bad in the moment. We only know in hindsight. And this is a great example. I got fired from that job, which was, a very average job. That first job I had in London, it was certainly not my dream job. It was fine. I wasn't miserable. It wasn't toxic, but I wasn't like I didn't move to work at a company like that. And so when I got fired from there, it was horrible. I thought it was the worst thing ever. And then I ended up in a job that was even worse than that one that was literally toxic. And I was so miserable that my friend couldn't even recognize me when she saw me. And you would think that that was a really bad thing. But I look back now and I'm like, oh, that was leading me to Nike. It was leading me to the job that kicked off my career, defined the early stages of my career. And so when you look back, you go, oh, was that a good thing or a bad thing getting fired? Like, it was absolutely one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And having my friend come and stay and be like, wow, you look awful. You're clearly not happy in this role, and shining a mirror in my face of what was going on was another great thing. So you look at these things, you go, was that good or bad? No, both of those things were absolutely the things that needed to happen. And the girl that sat next to me in the toxic job was the one that gave me the connection at this agency. So had I not met her, then I probably wouldn't have, you know, met with this agency and been in the right place at the right time for this opportunity at Nike. So you have to take your opportunities when they're there, but you also want to be pragmatic about the things happening in your career and say to yourself, I don't know whether this is a good or a bad thing until I look back in hindsight. And there's a good chance that when I look back in hindsight, this could be a really great thing for my career. So I'm going to keep believing that, something good is on the way for me, especially now I know a lot of people are not working at the moment. There's a lot of layoffs going on, and you just have to keep believing that good stuff is on the way.
I know this proverb that you're talking about. I'm gonna put it in the show notes of the YouTube video.
Mhm. That's a good one,
Um,
huh?
no, it really is. It really is. So you've mentioned, you worked really hard once you got your foot in the door here. How did these high performance environments really shape your understanding of what makes a marketer truly successful? Um, or had you already kind of like developed that beforehand?
Oh, no, no. I absolutely developed that working in these companies. Nike would be the formative one just because that's where I spent my 20s. By the time I got to Apple, I had a lot of experience at that point. And that's not to say I didn't learn anything at Apple. I absolutely learned plenty at Apple. But I think your 20s are your formative years. And again, I give this piece of advice a lot is that you really do want to end up in a great learning environment in your 20s. If you take a job and then the learning curve flattens and you're suddenly like, oh, I'm a bit comfortable here, I'm not learning, I don't have great leaders around me. Maybe you're working in a small company that doesn't have any budget and therefore you're not doing a lot of campaigns. I would suggest moving on and finding the next thing. You don't have to quit, but just start looking for the next thing because your 20s are just the time that you want to learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and then move on to the next thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to move on to another company. There could be other opportunities within the company that you're working in. But as soon as you feel that learning curve flatten, you need to go somewhere, either another role within the company or another company completely, where you're going to start learning again. Because what you learn in those first 10 years sets you up for the rest of your career. And I used to say to people, 1 year at Nike was worth 2 years in other companies, in the sense that we learned in 1 year what most people would learn in 2 or 3 years at their companies. And it's really just so important to have that learning curve early on.
In your experience, is that learning blocker, is that if that's how you described it, is that the most common career block that you see in these, like in marketing and like in the creative and tech kind of industries? Or is there another career block that you come across quite often?
It's definitely one that we're all guilty of, and I think we're guilty of it at every age. I think it's most important in your 20s because that's when you're still learning. Like, you've just started your career. You want to be learning as much as possible and moving on. You want to be surrounded by great leaders. You want to have good mentors. You want to work with just great people that you can learn from and do work that you can learn from and be proud of. But human nature is such that we like to be comfortable as human beings. Human beings, that's how we are. That's how we're wired. And so if you do get into a position where you're feeling quite comfortable, most people are not inclined to then shake things up and go and get another job or start pushing for more things. Some people are, of course, but most people, when you get comfortable, they want to sit there for a little bit. And I think in your 20s, that's not necessarily a good thing. And I say this with the hindsight of Nike, where they just kept pushing you. Like, it was a high performance environment. So you didn't really spend much time sitting around in your comfort zone because they were always pushing you. And the leaders there were encouraged to push you. So, I remember we had a guy on our team, James, who was an executive level. So he was a junior in our team, and he was probably 26 at the time, and he was working on a England rugby kit launch. And rugby wasn't a big sport for Nike, so no one else in our team, had the capacity to work on it. So we gave it to James. It's quite a big kit launch. It's like the England national team's kit launch. And we needed to present it to the English Rugby Union down at Twickenham, and we sent him down there on his own with the club manager, another guy from Nike. But we sent him down there by himself to present to the RFU, and he's one of my close friends, and we laughed about that recently. And I was like, "Isn't that so funny that we just said, off you go, like, you'll be fine, like we believe in you, you're fine." And he was fine. It wasn't a big deal, but most other companies might say, like, "Hey, you've got to go down there with a senior person because it's a senior meeting." He had the club business manager with him, who wasn't a marketing person, but he was a senior person in charge of that relationship, so he was fine. But most companies wouldn't say, "Hey, why don't you go do that?" Like, we didn't send him down there just because we didn't have capacity. We sent him down there because we knew he was capable. We knew it would push him out of his comfort zone a little bit. We knew he'd be a little bit scared, but we also knew that he was fine, and there was nothing that he could really do in terms of making a mistake that would completely railroad things. We knew that if he did make some mistakes, it'd be fine, and he would learn from it. And then he went on to become the GM of football at 32 years old, which is one of the most senior roles in the UK business. And it's because we gave people opportunities like that. And absolutely, that's part of your learning there, is that it's not just that you get pushed into new roles, it's that even within your role, people might say, "Hey, why don't you go present at that meeting?" Or, "Why don't you do some work on this?" And they'll give you stuff that stretches you if they feel like you're needing the stretch, needing the growth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I can, really resonate with that. I mean, I started my career as a hairdresser, moved across to various other creative industries, and now a trainee solicitor at Clifford Chance. And when I was, transitioning from, hairdresser to trainee solicitor, I had to do things that made my insides want to turn out. Like, it just it I did things that challenged me in ways that, like, I cannot even explain. But it's through those, like, complicated tasks and really, really using your mind that really help you grow. And now I will only put myself in challenging situations, because if I'm not challenging myself, then I'm not growing. And so I can completely, like, like, everything that you have just said makes complete sense to me anyway, and I'm sure to the listeners.
And one thing I hear a lot from people, especially younger people, they have quite a negative view of big global corporations. And one of the negative views I hear is like, you're just a number. There's lots of people there, so you're not going to get to like really own anything, versus a smaller company where you might get to own something because it's a smaller team. And what I'd say to that, and this is not a comparison with smaller companies because there's plenty of good things that can happen in smaller companies, and I can only speak to the bigger companies I've worked for. But the great thing about being young in a big company, especially one like a Nike, where they do really believe in developing the individual, is that there is room for you to make mistakes. Like you're not gonna, with that example of James, if he had made a mistake in that presentation, maybe something in the presentation was wrong, we can correct that afterwards. You know, it's not a big deal. Even if someone at the RFU was really angry and rang up and they were mad that James made a mistake, we could smooth that over. The whole of Nike wasn't going to fall over because of a mistake like that. And so when you're working there as a young person, you know you've got a little bit of room to make mistakes if you are trying things. And there's also senior people around who will support you. So unlike the example that I gave of that more toxic place that I was working, I didn't feel supported at all. When I got to Nike, I felt so much support from the senior leaders around me, not just my boss, like other senior leaders on the leadership team. And so there was this environment where it was like, oh wow, I can do things and try things, and if I get it wrong, there is a support network to help me and teach me, and the company's big. It doesn't matter if I make a mistake. And that's quite a comfort when you're in your 20s in terms of your learning and growth. Whereas I've had more junior people on my program who have come through and they've been let go from companies where they've made mistakes, and they're really quite innocent mistakes that you would expect someone in their 20s to make. But in a smaller company, it's really visible when you make a mistake because there's maybe only two or three of you in the marketing team. And again, this is not to say that there's not good things about smaller companies. There absolutely is. But a lot of people, particularly younger people, have a negative view of global corporations. And actually, there's some really fantastic ones out there that are known for really developing talent. Unilever is another one that has a good reputation. Diageo has a good reputation for developing people and giving them challenges. And so I wouldn't rule out big global orgs if you're younger is a great place to learn and grow because you will be surrounded by older people that are further on in their career who have fantastic skills that you can learn from. You'll be given opportunities and there's room to make mistakes. And I'm sure that's true of other industries as well.
I think that you have to really find out what the culture is like because you could go, echoing what you just said, you go to a smaller firm or larger one. But it depends on if the people who are in there are going to support you. Now, when I have interviewed for places before, um, certain people have said, don't bring up the culture because you don't know what it's like. You don't know that you've worked there before. But in my preparation for interviews, I've always messaged people on LinkedIn, senior people and not senior, because I'm going for the not senior roles. Um, so I can understand what it's like in there. So I can speak to these people, see how they engage. Now, and then I felt confident in saying during the interviews, I know that the culture seems to be like X, Y, and Z. Now, do you think that it's okay to talk about culture if you've not worked there before? What's your stance on that?
Yeah. So I think culture is really interesting. I think culture is really important. The environment is really important. It needs to match you. That's the key thing. It needs to match you. So where most people go wrong with culture is they're like, oh, does it have a good culture? And it's like, well, what does that even mean? Like that's quite a subjective thing. I know that Nike wouldn't have been for everybody. I know that not everybody would have been happy to be sent down to the rugby union on their own to give a presentation. That just wouldn't have been what most people would have enjoyed. That most people wouldn't want to be in a room full of really high performing people. I'd sit in meetings sometimes at Nike and I'd be like, God, my colleagues are amazing. Like these people are so much smarter and onto it than I am, and I'd feel like the dumbest person in the room, but I loved it because I was like, I'm so happy to be in this room with all these really smart onto it people. But some people wouldn't like an environment like that. They might feel out of their depth. They might not like I don't like to use the word competitive because it has a negative connotation. And actually, Nike, was not a negatively competitive place, but everybody was really good at their job. So it did lift the bar on what you did yourself. And sometimes you look around and be like, man, I want my work to be better because, my friend over here is doing fantastic work over on this team. And it makes you lift your bar. So for me, I loved that environment, but it's not for everybody. And so when you're thinking about culture and if you're thinking about, is this the right cultural fit for me? I don't believe that there's good cultures and bad cultures. I believe there's just what's right for you. And so understanding the culture starts with understanding who you are and the environments that you do well in and what your personality is. And then finding the places that match that. So when you're asking people like, oh, is there a good culture? That's not the right question to be asking. You want to be asking the questions that give you an understanding of whether it matches what is right for you and your personality and the stage of life you're at and what you need. And I'll give you an example. There was a girl on my program years ago, and the first part of my program is we go through clarifying this, like we do introspective work and we understand who you are and what you're looking for, and then we help you find companies that match that. And she was going through this point, and she had a conversation. She was really interested in L'Oreal as a company. And I know lots of people who've worked at L'Oreal. I know lots of people who've hated L'Oreal, and I know people that have loved L'Oreal. And so when people say like, "Oh, L'Oreal's got a good culture or a bad culture," I'm like, "Well, it's subjective, isn't it? Because you don't know that unless it matches you. Like, it's about you and whether you're the right fit for that company." And so this girl on my program, she spoke to two different people at L'Oreal, and she came to one of our calls one day and she said, "Steph, I'm still interested in L'Oreal, but I had two conflicting conversations. I spoke to one girl and she was raving about it, and I spoke to this guy and he was like, it's horrible, it's toxic, do not go work there." And I said, "Okay, well, what did they actually say? Like, not just it's toxic, it's not a good culture. Like, what literally were they saying?" Like the example I just gave you of Nike, then, where I said, "Look, people are really amazing and supportive, but the bar's really high, and you've got to be happy to be at that." Go into those specifics. What are they saying? And then she started laughing and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I just realized that they actually both described it exactly the same, except the girl was like, 'It's like this, I loved it.' And the guy was like, 'It's like this, I hated it.'" And they have the different view because they're different people. They want different things. They have different personalities. So they saw actually the company exactly the same. It's just that he interpreted it in a negative way and she interpreted it in a positive way. And they're just different people. They're looking for different things. And so that's why you do have some companies sometimes where some people love the environment, some people hate the environment, and everybody is different. And that's really, really important. Now, I'll caveat that by saying for sure, there's definitely some companies, I'm sure, where it's just an out and out toxic environment and you'd have to be pretty strange to enjoy, the kind of environment there. But I don't think there's as many toxic places as we think. I think we use that word quite liberally. And I think it really just comes down to your personality and what's right for you.
Thank you for that. Is an interesting point of view. So you mentioned your program and the Creative Career Lab, and I know that you've got a couple of programs on there that give specific advice for different kind of stages of people going out looking for jobs and making you stand out in interviews, for example. So I was wondering if I could just get your top tips on perhaps each one of those. So top tip for getting 100% crystal clear on what you need from your next perfect role.
Yeah, so that's a nice segue actually from what we've just been talking about. So it's there's lots of ways to do this, and it really is about self-awareness and understanding who you are. A lot of people are not very self-aware, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in the sense that we just go through life just at a million miles an hour. We don't sit down and reflect a lot on ourselves. And I think as you get older, you start to understand yourself a lot more, and it becomes a bit easier. But when you're younger, it is a bit less obvious. So it's about becoming really self aware so that as you start to have conversations and as you start to hear things about companies, you'll instantly know whether that's right or wrong for you because you've recently done the work to understand who you are and what you're looking for. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. One very practical thing that you can do. There is a website called 16personalities.com, and we use that website as part of our clarity at the beginning of the program. It's one piece of a very long process that we go through, but it's basically one of those personality tests where it tells you sort of your personality type. And often you'll read the results of that and you'll be thinking, "Gosh, yeah, I am like that, I am like that, yes, that's right, I am like that." And it's not that you don't know these are things about yourself, you just haven't thought about them recently. So that personality profile website is a really quick and easy way for you to tell yourself about yourself. And often you'll read it and be thinking, "Yeah, oh gosh, I forgot that I'm like that, or I need this." And so then as you start to get further into your job hunt, you've got that all front of mind so that as you're having conversations with people and hearing from people about the culture of a company, you can actually go, "Okay, does that match what I'm looking for or not?" And I'll give you one just really basic example, and this is very simple. It's a lot more complex than this, but I am inherently an introvert. I get my energy from being by myself. I'm very social. I like people. So I do enjoy being around people, but I do get drained quite easily from people. And so I look back on my time working on the agency side and having people kind of calling me constantly, like clients ringing, needing stuff. And actually, that didn't suit my personality. I needed work where I could kind of sit for a couple of hours and work on something and do some thinking and really be down in the quiet time. And actually, working on the client side versus the agency side of the creative industry worked way better for me. And once I knew that about my personality, I was like, that makes sense why I enjoy big global companies, because I do actually really like people and I like the social side of things and I love meeting new people. But when I get drained, I can't have clients ringing me needing things. Actually, to be able to go and do some deep work somewhere in the corner of the office and work on something is perfect for my personality type. And I think that's why, on reflection, I've always done really well in bigger companies like that. And that introspective work is what you can work out about yourself before you start looking at organizations.
Okay, so in order to like start looking at those organizations, let's talk a little bit about growing your network to perhaps get you in there. Um, what is your top tip on growing your network?
Yeah. So again, nice segue, Stephanie. I I'm not someone who can walk into a room of strangers and be comfortable. I can do it for sure. I have enough confidence to be able to do it, but I don't like it. And I certainly don't like that as a tactic for networking. And that's probably resonating with a few people listening right now, because I think that's true of a lot of people. Some people are really good at that. I'm not. So for me, building my network was always about how to build a quality network over a quantity network. And I always had really good relationships internally at Nike. And I left Nike uh, after 8 years to go to a company that didn't work out. It was a small startup, and I was headhunted to be the brand director there, and it didn't work out. And I got fired for the second time in my career after 3 months at that company. And I found myself unemployed for the first time in probably about 10 years at that point. And I knew from working at Nike that, like the way I got my job at Nike, that these roles were not the best roles in London, were not going to go through, recruiters or just applying on LinkedIn. That there was sort of back doors into a lot of these companies. And if that's how people got into Nike, then it was probably how people got into other big companies that I wanted to work for, like Google and Apple and companies like that. And so I realized that I was going to have to build my network. And because I didn't grow up in the UK, and because I'd spent pretty much my entire time in the UK at that point, 8 years working at Nike, I had a really strong internal network at Nike, but I didn't have an external network at all. And so the way I built my network was to ask people directly, because I had a lot of close relationships with individuals, was to ask them for a coffee. And I would sit down, and I was a bit lost at that point because I'd just been fired from this job. And I would say to them, like, hey, look, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next with my career. I'm a little bit lost. And do you have any advice for me? Like, what are you seeing in the market right now that's interesting? Is if you were in my situation, what would you do? And then I would also pick their brains about their career. Like, how did you make this move? What do you think of this function that you worked in? And so I was essentially going out and having coffees with people, but asking them for advice, not for a job. I didn't once ask anyone to help me with my job hunt, but because I came in asking for advice and asking for help and being curious about them and their careers, then I found that people were way more receptive. And then by the end of the conversation, they were all offering to help me with my job hunt. And I was like, that's so interesting, because I didn't actually come to ask for help with my job hunt, but they're all offering. And so I developed this process whereby I would ask people for advice, I would ask them for a coffee and get their advice, and I would pick their brains about their career, because there was so much that I could learn. And then inevitably they would end up offering to help with my job hunt. And then I would just ask them and say, hey, is there anyone else in your network that you think would be valuable for me to chat with? I'm trying to, really build out my network, but I'm also trying to learn more about the market and the industry and things that are going on. And people were really happy to do that, because they knew that I wasn't going to hassle their friend for a job. And so because I wasn't leading with, hey, can you help me with a job? People were willing to introduce me to other people. And again, it was a one-on-one conversation. So it was someone that I know introducing me to one of their friends on email saying, hey, this is my friend Steph, or my colleague Steph, and this is her situation. And I think you guys would love to, it'd be good to have a chat. And it sounds like a really slow way to do things, but it was such a higher quality uh, result in terms of the relationships that I built and how much people were willing to go into bat and help me. And my job at Apple came about because a guy that I met in December of the year before, uh, at the company that I got fired from, he introduced me to his old boss in January. I met up with her in February. She introduced me to a friend of hers, and then that person introduced me to the person at Apple that helped me get my job. So, and that was like June, July of the following year. So it was like a 6 month process, but I can see how each person that when I said, "Hey, is there anyone else in your network you can introduce me to someone that then led me to that job." So it's a slow process. It may seem like a slow process, but it's high quality in terms of people wanting to help you.
It's really interesting that you say that because I was reading a book not so long ago, and it talks about an investor. I'm pretty sure he's an investor, but he is the person on LinkedIn with the largest network, and he says that he's never asked anybody for anything, but um, when people find out like he may need this or that, whatever, they put him in touch with people. And this is the guy that has now got the largest amount of connections on LinkedIn. So what you are saying, you know, seems seems super true. So another program that you have on your site is writing a focused strategy for your job hunt. You also have one for writing an application that stands out and converts to interviews. So, what are your top tips for those two?
Yeah, so the strategy or the plan is essentially from the insight that most people when they job hunt don't have a plan. They have no idea what they're doing. They haven't written anything down. They're just on LinkedIn firing stuff off, easy applying, responding to every single recruiter that contacts them, hassling people in their network to help them look for a job, and there's no thinking and no strategy behind it. And anyone that works in marketing or the creative industry will know that if no one turns up on a Friday morning and launches a campaign. You know, like if Nike's launching a campaign, they don't turn up on Friday morning and just launch the campaign. That the 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 work for that launch starts a long time before that. Let's say a year before that. And it usually starts with some insights, some research, looking at the market, looking at the product, all those kind of things. And then from there, they'll put a plan together. And then when they come in on the Friday morning with the campaign launches, they're executing that plan. And the reason that campaigns are designed like that is because if you don't have that plan, then the success of the campaign isn't going to be as good. And so your job hunt is the same. If you're just turning up on Friday morning, flying stuff off on LinkedIn, sending out applications, you've got no thinking, no strategy behind what you're doing, no goalposts around what it is that you're trying to achieve, then you're not going to get a very successful job hunt success. And what not successful looks like to me is a job that you don't like, or a job that's not aligned to who you are and what you're looking for, or a job that just isn't taking you in the direction in your career that you want to go. Like even if you like a job, like I liked my first job in London, but it certainly wasn't what I came to the UK for. It wasn't what I went and got my marketing degree for. I wanted to work in big global brands. And so even if a job is okay, it doesn't mean it's getting you on the path to where you want to go. So you want to do that thinking before you end up in your job hunt. And that's the plan, that's the strategy. And that actually is overlapped or overlaid with the introspective work we talked about earlier about understanding who you are and what you're looking for. You do the introspective work and then you overlay it with your understanding of the creative industry or whatever industry you work in, and then you put a plan together that reflects who you are and what it is that you're looking for. And then that plan becomes the roadmap that you can follow to get your next job. And the outcome of your job hunt then will be a job that is something that really fulfills you, something where your values are aligned to the company that you're working for. It's going to be a much more successful outcome if you've done that planning in advance.
Okay, so you've done your planning in advance. You know who you are as a person, and you know the industry that you want to work in, and you know the company that you want to work for. How then do you pitch yourself and position yourself as the must-have hire?
So, pitching is something that most people struggle with in job hunting. Most people don't do it at all. Pitching is essentially showing the hiring team that you can solve the problem that they are trying to solve. So whether it's the hiring problem or whether it's a bigger problem that they have, you want to position yourself as the solution to that problem. So when most people are job hunting, they just talk about themselves. They talk about, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. I went to this uni, I got this result. They talk about themselves. They never connect it to the company that they are applying to. And so it's like you have the company you're applying to here and you have your application here, and there's no connection between the two. The people that do best in job hunting are the people that pitch themselves. And pitching yourself is essentially positioning yourself as the solution to the problem for this company. So I always use this example of going to Harvard because most people would say like going to Harvard is is fantastic. Of course, if you're applying for a job, you tell everyone you went to Harvard. But it depends, is the truth. Going to Harvard is not going to be appealing to every single company that you apply for. In fact, some companies may look at it and be like, it's not really our jam, especially in marketing, because so much of marketing is understanding culture, is understanding the market, is understanding the consumer. And my perception would be there's a certain type of person that would go to Harvard, and maybe they might not understand my brand if I'm a cool streetwear brand or I'm a fashion brand. Maybe you're not the right fit, and that might be the perception. Whereas if you're applying to a startup and you're in a business development role and they want you to have a little black book of connections to help them in their business, then of course going to Harvard might be a great way to lead your pitch to say like, hey, I went to Harvard and therefore this is what I can offer. And so every single thing that you have done in your career and the education that you've had, it's not going to appeal to every single company that you apply for. You need to put yourself in their shoes first and try and understand, well, what are they solving for here? What's the challenge here? What are they looking for? And a big part of that comes from the job description, but a big part of that also can come from you just sitting down and really putting yourself in their shoes and trying to understand what might be the challenge here. So one of the examples I always give is, you'll never see on a job description, or I've never seen on a job description for Nike or Apple that you need to have worked in a big global organization before. That's not something that they necessarily care about. But when you have worked in one before, you know that actually being able to navigate through a big global company is a benefit when you've already worked in one before. And so that could be part of your pitch, even though it's not written on the job description. That could be something that you pitch, that you point out in your application, that you point out in the interview as a reason to hire you, that the hiring manager might not have written on the job description, but they will definitely be thinking, gosh, yeah, the fact that Stephanie's already worked in a big global company, that will be so handy, because people that join this company usually take 6 months to get used to the big global nature of this company. And so that's the pitch. It's about translating it into a language that they understand. It's about really showing them how you're the solution to their problems, not just
Perfect.
talking about yourself.
Yeah, so you really do have to tie yourself to the firm or company.
Yeah,
Mm.
and not everything you've done needs to be on there. Like, not everything you've done is going to be relevant for them. And if you go into an interview and you're giving examples of things, they may ask you, tell us a time that you had a challenge with someone you worked with. Well, you might have lots of different examples of challenges, but you want to pick the one that is going to position you as the best solution for them. So if you're going for a role where you're going to be working with a sales team a lot, which is the marketing roles I've had have been really linked to sales. So if I was interviewing for a role in marketing where I worked closely with a sales team and somebody asked me the question, tell me about a time you had a challenge, I would give them an example of a challenge with the sales team, because I'm showing them that I've worked with a sales team. I could also give them a challenge that I had with one of my other colleagues or someone else in the marketing team, but giving them an example of the sales team is a better example, because that's literally part of the role, and it starts to position me as someone that knows how to work really well with sales teams and has had experience of working with sales teams as well.
So, how important is it for marketers and creatives to build a public personal brand or social media presence today before they bag themselves a job?
I actually don't think it's that important, which is controversial to say. I don't think that you have to have a strong social media presence, particularly on LinkedIn. People talk a lot about building your personal brand on LinkedIn. I don't think you have to have that to get a job. If you have it though, is it going to help? Of course. If you've become a thought leader on LinkedIn around whatever the topic is or the area of the industry that you work in, then it's definitely going to be helpful. If you have 100,000 followers on Instagram because you have a fashion blog and you're applying for a role at ASOS, then I'm sure they're going to think that's impressive. That's definitely going to count. And same with, if you have a TikTok channel talking about, whatever your subject matter is, and you've got tons of followers, then of course someone's going to look at that. And in marketing, the creative industry, they may not care in other industries, but they definitely will care in our industry. So having those things is not going to be a bad thing necessarily, because that is what our industry is about, especially social platforms. If you can demonstrate that you really deeply understand certain social platforms and you've built followings on them, that is a skill set that is relevant to our industry. But I don't think you have to build that to get a job, in the sense that a lot of people waste a lot of time posting on LinkedIn, building their personal brand on LinkedIn, when there is much higher value activities that you could be doing that will more directly get you a job, for example, networking. I would rather you spent all week networking than all week on LinkedIn posting and engaging with posts. Over time, that time you spend on LinkedIn will reward you over the next 6 months, 12 months. For sure, it may reward you over that amount of time, but it's not as instant as something like networking is gonna be, or getting better at pitching yourself, putting together really strong applications, practicing your interviewing, record your interview and watch it back. Spend time doing things like that. Those are much higher value activities that are going to more directly get you a job. Whereas the stuff on LinkedIn, it's still valuable, but it's not as instant as what this other stuff is. So don't waste your time on those kind of activities at this stage. I always say to the guys on my program, when you get a job, that's a great time to start building your personal brand because you don't need to worry about job hunting anymore. And that extra time that you used to spend job hunting, now you can convert that to posting on LinkedIn, engaging on LinkedIn, but it can become a tool for procrastination when you're job hunting, and it can really suck a lot of time away. And I post on LinkedIn 5 days a week. I also post on TikTok 3 to 4 days a week. And I engage on content on LinkedIn constantly. And this is my full time job, and it takes ages. So if this is my full time job and it's taking ages, and other people are trying to do it alongside job hunting, I just don't think it's a high value activity to be doing at this point.
Completely agree with you. When I was interviewing for my training contracts and I had to become commercially, I don't know why I'm doing this, had to become commercially aware, had to understand what was going on in the legal industry, financial sector, all that kind of stuff. And I actually quit my job to do it. So I
Yeah.
essentially spent a year preparing for my interview. Um, and there wasn't really any posting on LinkedIn, then. I did have a podcast I used to do that's separate to this, so I used to, post about that. But, it does take a long time. Nowadays, I post sometimes on a Friday, well, more times than not. I'll post about, like, podcasts that I have listened to this week, um, and explained why I like them. But that post takes a while to
Ages.
write, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't think it would have done because it's a relatively short one, but it takes a while. And my niece Billy, she's in marketing. She works for a phone brand, um, and she got on the LinkedIn hype a couple of years ago and was writing these full-blown blog posts, like, one every other day, and she almost had a nervous breakdown. She was like, "I've run out of stuff to write. It's taking so long."
Yeah, it's a time suck. It's a time suck, and it does over time. If you're consistent with it, if you find a cadence that works for you, like I write a weekly newsletter. Again, I do this full time, so I can carve out the time to write my weekly newsletter. But if I was working full time for someone else, it would be hard to find the time. So maybe put out a monthly newsletter if that's what you want to do. If you want to write a blog post or write a newsletter, if you want to post on LinkedIn, maybe you post 2 days a week or 3 days a week. Just be consistent with it. And I do think over time, it gets you visible. It can definitely create opportunities for you. I have a friend, Lauren Spearman, who, if you are in the marketing industry, you may know her. She's got quite a big TikTok following. Her and I connected because she was job hunting about 2 years ago, and she started documenting her job hunt on TikTok, and she was finding it really difficult. And I really resonated with her story because we're about the same age, and I went through, a similar thing back in 2014. And so I reached out to her and we connected, and she's wonderful. And off the back of building this following on TikTok, sorry, and being really vulnerable with how tough the job market was and how much she was struggling. She's actually now working freelance, and she just does contract marketing work because she's got so many people coming to her, and she's building a TikTok channel, and she gets asked to talk at things about TikTok and social media. And she's actually built a fractional career where she does a bit of content creation. She did have a podcast for a while, and it's wonderful, and I'm so happy for her. And that's a great example of accidentally the content she created, therefore created, not even created a role. It created opportunities that she's
Yeah.
since taken. But she is further on in her career. She's in her early 40s, and so she has a lot of experience in the sense that those kind of contract roles are a lot more accessible. So yeah, if you are job hunting, I hate the idea that people spend all this time creating content when actually it's a very low value activity in terms of immediate response.
Yeah. So I'd like to touch on your angel investing now before we near the end of the show. Um, how did you get involved in investing in early stage startups?
So a close friend of mine, Amy, she founded a femtech company called Moody. It's an app that tracks hormones. It's a fantastic app. If anybody is interested in it, I am an investor. She founded this company, gosh, about probably 10 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago, and she was raising family and friends investment at the time. And she's a very good friend. She's also someone I hugely respect. She'd already founded her first company at 23 years old, which is how I met her when she was um, running that business. And so she's someone that I really believe in, and I wanted to invest in her company. And off the back of investing in her company, the woman that ran the investment round said to me, like if you enjoy investing in early stage companies, like there are other companies and other brands and industries that you may be familiar with. So would you be interested? And yeah, I just got involved that way. It sounds very glamorous, angel investing, and it sounds like something that people with lots of money would be doing. It's not the case. You can put very small amounts um, into these companies, but it is very high risk. It's definitely not for everyone. You definitely wouldn't put money in there that you couldn't afford to lose. And the reason I do it is because I don't personally want to build a company like that. I don't want to build a tech company and take on investment, and it's way too stressful. I much prefer running my business with my two assistants, and then that's it. But I love being on the journey. I love these products, particularly a lot of the investors that the companies I have invested in have female founders, and it's really hard for women to get investment, especially in those early stages. And so I felt really good about investing in these female led businesses, and then getting to be on the journey with them and getting to see where they go. You get involved in the updates. You can help them out where you can if you have anything you can offer. And yeah, it's just been a wonderful thing to be part of, and it's been really eye opening to understand how early stage companies work, how the investment works. I'm by no means an expert at all. I can only speak from my personal side of being on the investor side and having skin in the game. I've put money into these companies, so it's an eye opening space, and one that I've enjoyed being part of. And enjoyed, as I said, being on the journey with these wonderful female founders.
Having worked as a brand director at a startup and now investing in early stage companies, you have a unique perspective on both sides of the table. So, what key considerations should marketers and creators keep in mind before joining a startup, especially when it comes to navigating the pressures and dynamics of early stage environments?
Yeah, good question. I do talk a lot about startups with my clients a lot because it's definitely a space that people are interested in. And what I would say, I left Nike to go to essentially a startup. It was not early stage, and it was well funded, but it was definitely in its earlier stages than what it has become now. And so I do have experience of that, and can see it from that side as well. What I would say is that I think one of the big things that people get seduced by with startups is this idea that you get equity, and that when that startup suddenly IPOs or gets sold, you're going to make tons of money. And I think as an employee that can be really enticing because we earn salaries, there's a cap on our salaries. The idea that all of a sudden you could become really wealthy is very seducing. And so when a lot of these startups make you an offer, there can be equity involved in that, and you do take that into consideration. What I know as someone who's been investing in startups for almost 10 years is that most startups do not IPO or get bought. Most of them will go under, and the ones that do, you definitely have potential to make great money off, but it probably won't be in the 3 to 5 years that the founder will tell you it will be. It will be much longer than that typically. And it probably won't be as much as you think. We have these images of like, the first, I think it was like the first 9 employees of WhatsApp became like multimillionaires off the back of their investment, or maybe even billionaires. I think they might have become billionaires. And so you hear that and you're like, wow, that could be me. And it's like, that's the unicorn. That very rarely happens. So you have to be really careful with that. And that's something I always um just tell my clients, just to think of that as the bonus, not as part of part of the package, because that often doesn't come about. And you might spend a lot of time sitting around waiting for that. Even if you've ever watched the WeWork um, TV show on Apple TV,
Yeah.
all the early employees of that, if you remember, they were all like hanging around waiting because they're like, oh, we're going to IPO soon, we're going to IPO, and they all had equity in the company and they were waiting for it to happen, and it never happened. And people hung around for a long time waiting for that. So you just have to be careful with that. On the flip side, I do actually know a friend of a friend who was a very early uh, a graphic designer who was one of the first employees of Canva and in Australia, and he doesn't work anymore since they IPO'd. So there is the unicorn out there, but I promise you that it will be luck if that happens, not anything that you are able to see at the time.
Um, I mean, I think it's as the same reasons why you're doing it, like to be on the journey and understanding, you know, all these fantastic people who are out there building companies, doing fantastic things. It is fun to be on the journey with them, and if you get a good return at the end of it, all the better. So
Absolutely.
we've spoken a lot about, getting out there, getting yourself a job, challenging yourself, building a network, pitching yourself. To me, those kind of things are really, as the show is called, taking care of business. For me, taking care of business is waking up in the morning, going to the gym, going to work, organizing my day, smashing out all the things that I need to do, eating healthily, going to bed at a reasonable hour, and waking up and kind of doing it all over again because I'm in that hustle part of my life. But as I said, the name of the show is Taking Care of Business. So, Steph, what does taking care of business mean to you?
So I very much resonate with what you just said there, Stephanie, because I was in that hustle part of my life as well, at one stage not so long ago, and it's a fun stage to be in. You definitely feel like you're on top of things, but as you get older, you do want to quiet those things down. So I would say from a personal level, it's some of the things that you mentioned there. Eating well. I try to exercise regularly. After this podcast, I'm going to go for a big long walk and listen to a podcast and just fill my mind with good healthy thinking. So I love to do that. I love to be, learning, listening to things. Big podcast fan, as I'm sure lots of people listening to this are. And so my favorite thing to do is go for a big long walk and just listen to something really interesting and thought provoking, or something I can learn from. So on a personal level, that's really important for me. Spending time with my family. I spend a lot of time back in New Zealand now, where my parents are. They're retired, and it's just so wonderful after 17 years in the UK to be able to come back and spend time with them. So yeah, family, health, wellness, that stuff's really important to me. And from a business standpoint, as in my own business, I taking care of businesses is taking care of my clients. Once someone joins my program, I am so invested in getting them into their next role. And I really mean that in the sense that that's what brings me joy. Someone said to me once, like, why don't you just sell your program as just like content online, like just a video that people can watch? And I was like, but then I wouldn't get to know my clients. I wouldn't be on the journey with them. Like, I genuinely love like being on the journey with someone. And when they get to the end of that, having them get a job that they then love is the best feeling in the world. I can't even tell. I think it's even better than when I got my job at Apple, which was unbelievable. I have had clients that have really hated their jobs or have never had a job that they love. I had one client the other day tell me that she thought I was, I hope I can swear on here, but she said, I thought you were full of shit when you told me that people wake up on Monday morning and love their job. And I thought you were full of shit when you said that there's people who want to go into the office, because she hated going into the office. And she now works at Lego. Lego, by all accounts, is a fantastic employer. She loves her team. She loves going into the office. She told me she goes in on Fridays, even though they're hybrid. You don't have to go in on Fridays, but she's like, my team's a vibe. A lot of them go on Fridays because they like to go into the office. I go on Fridays because it's just better than being at home by myself. And she's like, I just thought that you were full of shit. I didn't think that you could love jobs like this. And she's like, it's just amazing. And having her tell me that just makes me so happy. And it just drives me to want all of my clients to find that. And I want that for everyone. I want everyone to find a place that they love where they wake up, they go to work, they feel really passionate about what they're doing, they feel happy. Because unless you have a trust fund, and I don't have that, you're going to have to work. Like I had to work, most people have to work. So why not wake up and go to something that you really love and believe in? And I know that it sounds really idealistic, but I promise you there is stuff out there for everyone. I have had so many people join my program and not believe that that's possible for them and now be in jobs they love and on the path with their career that they've always wanted. And it's just something I feel really passionate about. So, from a business perspective, making sure my clients get to where they want to go is taking care of business for me.
I think that's the best answer that I've heard in a very long time. Um, what is taking care of business if you're not, you know, taking care of living a happy life? And that should be
Yeah,
personal and professional. So thank
absolutely.
you for that. And thank you for all of the fantastic advice, tips, and yeah, just general advice and opinion on the show today. So thank you ever so much. You are cooler than I thought you
Oh, you're
were.
so sweet. Thank you, Stephanie. That's so sweet. And thank
You
you
have
for
been
having me. Thank you for
my
the work
pleasure.
that you do as well. It's so wonderful that you facilitate this to get this kind of knowledge out to people. I really love that. So thank you for the work you do as well.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody for tuning into another episode of Taking Care of Business. And we'll see you back again here next time.